Which one's he? Oh, there we go. Sweet. Okay.
Yeah, so the on-off is just a switch on the top.
On the top.
Yep.
Oh, goodness. This is great. Which one is that?
So it's right by.
There we go. Or, no.
So it is on currently.
It's on.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Gabby Lara. I'm the president of Ravens Respect Life. I'm going to briefly introduce Jalen. He grew up in Aurora, Colorado, and graduated from Regis University after studying politics and history. Jalen has been involved with Students for Life since 2015. Since then, he has been the president and founder of Students for Life groups at Regis Jesuit High School and the Community College of Aurora, and was the president of Regis Students for Life from Regis University. He was also a Stevens, Wilberforce Christian Leadership, and Invictus Men's Fellow, and a Students for Life spokesperson, Students for Life Action State Captain, and an intern for the Students for Life programs and development team, a campaign intern for Students for Life Action, and the public policy coordinator for Denver Pro-Life Future. Jalen was also a member of Students for Life of America's international mission trips to Ireland. He sidewalk counseled at the Stapleton Planned Parenthood in Denver, lobbied for pro-life laws both in Colorado and in Washington, D.C., and collected signatures for Colorado's Proposition 115 to ban abortion at 22 weeks. So give us a warm welcome to Jalen Jerusalem.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. It's such a blessing for two reasons. One, I always love the opportunity to come and give my story to, everyone else, because as my dad used to tell me that we're storytellers, and the one way that we like to communicate is by telling stories, something that my family knows way too well, because once you get me talking, it's hard to get me to stop. But it's also a blessing for another reason, and that's because, as you know, if you saw all of the literature and all of the promotion ads around Benedictine this week, I'm an unplanned pregnancy. And specifically, statistically speaking, it's difficult to see my chances of survival past the womb. And yet here I am getting to speak to all of you today. So for someone like me, person of color, growing up in a community of color, it's especially difficult. And in the year of my birth, 1 in every 450 children that were born to a woman or that were in a situation with a woman of color actually ended up losing their life to abortion. And the sobering reality is that children like me don't always get that opportunity, especially when you find yourself in an unplanned pregnancy and you're a teenage mother, you have no idea what to do. So, if you'll bear with me for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, hopefully something on the shorter end, we can kind of get to know each other a little bit better. So my father moved here from Guam when he was 18, and he knew no one. And in fact, my father knew nothing about the state he was moving to, Colorado, because coming from Guam, he assumed that the weather like Guam was as perfect as it was there as it is everywhere. So he showed up in a classic Denver January snowstorm in shorts and a tank top. And had it not been for my Uncle Carl, my dad probably would have gotten frostbite or something terrible. But my dad moved here because ultimately, even though he was an American citizen, the opportunities for him in Guam or the Philippines where he was born weren't as great as they were here in the mainland. However, soon after my dad arrives here in the US, he meets my mother, gratefully, obviously, and they get a relationship going and they break up. Pretty typical, right? Relationships end all the time. Except for my dad and my mom, they soon found out my mother was pregnant with me. And at the time, my mom is 18, soon to be 19. She hasn't finished school. And in fact, she won't graduate from high school. Years later, she'll work really hard and get her GED. But at the time, no one knew what to do. And had I been in any other circumstance, there's a good chance that I wouldn't actually get to be here today. But I like to think that God has called me for a specific reason, and that's why I get to stand in front of you today. Because when I think of my story, and I think of the story of children like me, and I think of this society that we live in, we realize that ultimately there's a breakdown. And especially when we realize that we don't hold all life to be unique. And we don't hold all life to be sacred, as we're taught to do. In fact, I didn't even know about abortion. I don't know about all of you, but I didn't learn about abortion until I was about 8, and I was sitting in church, and this video plays about the personhood amendment that's coming up in Colorado. And they were saying how great it was going to be and how if we did this, we would be able to ban abortion, be able to save more lives. And I remember leaving and asking my grandma, hey, what is abortion? And my grandma tells me that it's bad, and that's all there is to it. You know, grandma is always right? So I'm like, okay, perfect. It's always wrong. I can work with that. But for some reason, there's an itch, and I can't scratch it. So I ask my dad, Dad, what is abortion? And my dad tells me, abortion is bad, son, but sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes there's going to be times when a woman needs one, and there's nothing else that she can do. And again, my dad is, at least at the time, and probably still now, much smarter than I am. So I take that, and I'm like, perfect. Abortion's bad, but not always. And I can work with that. So I do. And I go about my life, and I soon find myself at Regis Jesuit High School. And I am your typical terrible high school student. I don't turn any assignments in because why bother? My grades are slipping, college chances are looking slim, and if I'm honest, I felt directionless. At least until I meet my junior theology teacher, Mrs. Sarah Kernan, and she tells me that the school's going on a trip called the March for Life, one that I'm assuming that almost everyone in this room, if not everyone, has been on or would like to go to. And she says that for the first time in the school's history, they were going to allow junior boys to go, because typically March for Life is considered a seniors-only trip. And I'll tell her that I'm interested, and Ms. Kernan asks me, Jalen, what's your opinion on abortion? And I tell her, I don't know. In fact, I think sometimes it might not be as bad as we think it is. And she tells me, perfect, I think you're the student that needs to go on this trip. And I was like, cool. And I was like, so how does it look? And she was like, let me talk to Mr. Lechuga. Mr. Lechuga finds me later in the day, and he goes, okay, you're on financial aid, so we'll let you go to DC for $100. And all I can hear is, I get to go to DC for only $100. So I'm like, sign me up. $100, like, I could go do a shift at work, or if I just beg my family enough, someone will give me $100, right? And I get to go. And what I encounter is nothing like what I think it's going to be like. You know, constantly we're told that pro-lifers are like these old, white, angry Catholic men, right? So I'm expecting to like go and see all these old guys with like canes and walkers, and it's just going to be like a really slow process down Constitution Avenue. And instead what I see is people like you and me, young people on fire, not only for the issue of abortion, but about their faith, which really hit me in my core, because kind of with the rest of my life, my faith life felt very directionless. And in fact, I just wasn't going to church anymore, because what was the point? I didn't see a point, so I didn't go. And after that day, as I'm sitting there in my room, and my roommate for the trip, Mark Ahern, and I order pizza because, of course, every 17-year-old guy gets really hungry at the weirdest hours of the day. So at like 8:30 at night, Mark and I decided to order a pizza, and we do, and he goes down to get it. And I have this moment to myself, and I think, I haven't prayed in years. I think I need to do that now. So I get on my knees and I pray, and I'm just like, God, you're telling me something, and I have no idea what it is. I just hope that I can figure it out soon. Well, as God has it, I would actually find it out really soon, because the next day I meet Lauren Castillo, my first regional coordinator for Students for Life, and Lauren is like, you should start a pro-life group at your school. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I don't know what that means, but let's start one anyway. It sounds fun. So a few months later, after this conference, we meet at a Starbucks, and Lo gives me this binder of all of these things, and she's telling me things I've never heard about, like you should refer to a child in the womb as the preborn child, because unborn actually doesn't make grammatical sense. And here's all the kinds of abortions that happen. Here's arguments for why these abortions are bad. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on? And then Lo goes, you should apply for one of our fellowships. It's the Thaddeus Stevens Leadership Fellowship. And I really think that you would be a good fit. And I'm sitting there thinking, Lo, are you out of your mind? I decided I was pro-life like 2 months ago. And you want me to go do this fellowship and like compete against other people to get this spot? Because I don't even know how to say it, how I'm pro-life, because I just discovered I'm pro-life. But I listen to her and I apply, and somehow I get in. And whoever was in charge of those applications, to this day I still think was wrong to pick me, but I'm not going to complain. And I get in, and I meet who's now become one of my closest friends, Cassidy Roderick. And Cassidy and I are kind of in a unique situation, because typically for our fellowships, one student from each school gets to go. However, Cassidy and I secretly, and not really actually secretly, but because I went to a Jesuit high school, in fact, the only Jesuit high school in the country that does this, there was a boys' division and a girls' division that operated technically as two separate schools, but were part of the same school. So we had two separate pro-life groups going at the time. So Students for Life gave us the okay to count ourselves as two separate high schools. So we both got into this fellowship, and when I finally go to the airport to fly out in July, the first question Cassidy asks me is, hey, are you Catholic? And I'm like, no, I'm Southern Baptist, but I haven't really gone to church in a while. And Cassidy pretty much goes on all the reasons I should be Catholic. And I'm like, this girl is crazy. Like, I was raised to kind of think that Catholics weren't Christian, because all these crazy teachings that to this day I still sometimes don't understand. And I'm just struggling, and she's telling me all of these things, like, yeah, we eat Jesus's body and drink Jesus's blood. And I'm like, okay, take this back a second. Like, you do what when you go to church? Because we don't do that. I don't know, eating people seems wrong, but that's just me. And she starts telling me all of these things, and I'm just like, what is she talking about? I have no idea. But this begins kind of this friendship between us as we kind of go about this journey in this fellowship together, and as we kind of, find ways that we can impact our community to be more pro-life. So as we're going through things, we go to at least my first 40 Days for Life event, and first time I actually pray my first rosary is outside of Planned Parenthood. And then shortly after, we drop off diapers at two different pregnancy centers, Marisol Health and Alternatives Pregnancy Center, both in Denver, because we did this amazing diaper drive that was started by amazing students that came well before me, and Cassidy and I were just lucky enough to have this infrastructure in place before us. But that year we were able to set a record for the region at 11,000 diapers raised for these pregnancy centers, which my alma mater, Regis Jesuit, has actually broken again, and most recently they got over 50,000 diapers and filled 2 semi-trucks to take to Marisol Health and Alternatives. But we do this, and as we're on the way to these pregnancy centers, Cassidy asks me, so why aren't you Catholic? And it's a question that I haven't really been ready for, right? Like, how do you answer that, especially when you've never, like, the thought of becoming Catholic's never really crossed your mind. So I tell her all of these different things, like, hey, here's all the reasons I'm not Catholic. And she basically gives me rebuttals for all of them. And I'm starting to see that at least the Southern Baptist faith and the Catholic faith don't have too many differences. Few key ones, but for the most part, there's a lot of similarity. And Cassidy finally goes, it sounds like for the most part you believe what we believe. And honestly, the reason you should become Catholic is because of the Eucharist. And I remarked to Cassidy that day that if Jesus is really present in the Eucharist, I guess I'll become Catholic one day. And I'm sitting there kind of laughing and patting myself on the back because I'm like, wow, I really got her this time. obviously, as we all know, and I'll get to later in my talk, I'm the one that got. It's like that saying goes, right? When you make plans, God just laughs at you. Well, I'm pretty sure he was bent over, just red in the face, because I can't believe I said something that foolish. But we go through this, and then she just keeps pushing me to kind of, explore this new faith. And she takes me to adoration, which for a Southern Baptist is like the craziest experience. Because when I grew up going to church, I would spend most of the service singing and praising and the whole hand in the air thing. And so to go and just sit there in prayer in the presence of our Lord was different to me. And it was really comforting. And I love it. And I was like, we leave, and I was like, wow, that was amazing. Can we do that again? And even better, the parish that we were at the time, Our Lady of Loretto, actually has perpetual adoration. So she gives me just a code and says, come back anytime, which I did multiple times before I just make my decision. But there's something still eating at me, and it's crazy. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, wow, this girl is starting to make some sense. She's not crazy like I thought, but I don't know. I'm having a hard time connecting these. She also gives me Rome Sweet Home, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, and I hated it. Nothing against Dr. Hahn. Wonderful book, well laid out. But as I read the book, I'm kind of like, wow, I guess I can experience all of this wonderfulness without being Catholic. Like, if I can do that, why would I want to be Catholic? What's the point? There is none. And I tell her that, and she was like, oh, you'll see. And again, I'm like, okay, she's crazy. I don't know what she means by I'll see, but whatever, right? And soon after, I'm talking with Lo about it, and Lo's kind of giving me some points, and I'm like, okay. And we just move on until at least the end of my senior year of high school, as we're kind of rounding up the fellowship, and it's coming to a close, and Cassidy and I are about to go to different schools. But Lo invites us to come table at the Steubenville of the Rockies conference, and I was like, great. Sounds fun, let's do it. And Cassidy's like, hey, the adoration here is unlike anything you probably ever will do, so you should go. And I was like, perfect, let's do it. What time? She was like, Saturday at, I think, 7 p.m. So, great. Oh, and I was like, I think I can do that. And I checked my calendar, and I was like, oh, shoot, I have a baseball game. I'll be a little late, but I think I'll get there before 7. She was like, great, that works. So we make our plan. We're like, we're going to go to adoration at Steubenville. And, well, I end up being late because at my baseball game, I got thrown out of the game. First and only time I've been thrown out of a baseball game. And I have some choice words for the umpire, and I cussed this poor man out that I've never seen again in my life. So hopefully he doesn't remember this. Probably doesn't, because getting cussed out by some 17-year-old is, probably not the highlight of your life. But as I go, and I wait because I'm just really angry and over a silly game, but I just can't get past my anger, and I finally do, so I show up, and Cassidy's like, well, dude, you're like 2 hours late now, which I've been perpetually late, but 2 hours was kind of something new. And I was like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry, it's been a rough, crazy kind of like 4 hours for me, so I'm better now, I'm here, let's get it on. She's like, well, adoration's over, dude. But they're finishing up Mass if you want to go check out the end of Mass. So I was like, great. And we go. And something changes. And I'm an emotional person. Anyone that knows me probably knows that way too well by now. But as I'm in Mass, something about it, and I see everyone just sitting there, and the priest comes down, and they do their procession out, and I've never felt more alive. And I start tearing up, and Cassidy looks at me, and she goes, hey, what's wrong? And I was like, no, nothing's wrong whatsoever. And I'm trying to get her to leave me alone, because I don't want to tell her what is going on in my brain right now, because I don't know what's going on in my brain right now. And she's like, let's go outside. And I was like, oh, great, here it goes. And we go outside, and Cassidy says, so what's on your mind? And I was like, I think I'm ready. She was like, what do you mean you're ready? Ready for what? And I was like, I'm ready to come home. Ready to be Catholic now. And I turn and look, and she's sitting there with her jaw on the floor, just shocked. And then she goes, I don't even know what to do right now. Do we hug? Do I pat you on the back? It's like, we can hug. That seems normal, right? So we hug. And then we go inside, and Lo is sitting there at our table. And I was like, hey, Lo, I got some news. She's like, okay, hit me. Like, I'm going to be Catholic now. So we all start a group hug with the three of us, and we're all crying. Cassidy's even crying, and she didn't cry at Finding Dory, so that woman never cries. And I'm just so moved, and Cassidy goes, hey, next week there's Mass at Our Lady of Loretto. Do you want to come with me? And of course, there's Mass every Sunday, but I was like, yeah. So we make this plan, and I'm going to come to Mass with her. And then a couple days before, she was like, hey, my parents want to talk to you and meet with you, which is awesome because Mr. Roderick is the bomb, and he's one of my favorite people of all time. So I was like, yes, let's have dinner with your family because that sounds great. And we go out and we go to Mass. But on the way to Mass, I'm listening to K-Love or whatever one of the Christian stations it is because I have an old car. And up until recently, I could only listen to the normal radio. And Chris Tomlin's At the Cross comes on. And the verse where he starts talking about surrendering yourself at the cross and just giving it all to Christ. And I start bawling my eyes out because I'm realizing that I'm at this moment of pure surrender and that I have nothing left but to just follow where Jesus is leading me. And for the first time, I'm actually beating Cassidy somewhere, and Cassidy's late to Mass, which is crazy, and I'll get to why it's crazy in a little bit. But I beat her to Mass, and I'm waiting in the narthex, and finally her and her brother Ethan show up, and we go, and we find a seat. And, it's Mass, which is wonderful, but I still don't understand the whole beauty of it. But after Mass, and we go to Cassidy's house, and we enter her home, her parents tell us that dinner's almost ready and that we should have it soon. And I'm like, great. And then Cassidy's like, hey, come with me to my room for a second. So I was like, okay, cool. And she hands me a few things. So first she hands me the catechism, because obviously every new Catholic is going to have to understand what the Catholic faith is about. Seems like a pretty normal gift, right? She hands me a rosary book and goes, hey, you're going to need to know how to pray a rosary, so here you go. You're going to need this. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then Cassidy hands me something else, which I actually happen to have on me today. Cassidy hands me this rosary, and she says, here's a rosary for you. And I was like, thanks. And she's like, this is the rosary I've been praying for your conversion with. And I'm floored. And then Cassidy points to her cork board, which every girl in my high school had a cork board. I saw it in all the Instagram photos, so it didn't seem anything crazy to me, right? And there's all these color-coded note cards. So I assume it's like her schedule or something. And she's like, do you know what those are? And I was like, no clue. She's like, these are all the people that have been praying for you. And as I'm doing right now, I start crying. And I'm bewildered. Because for once, I understood what this concept that we call agapic love is, right? And this concept that to truly love someone, you have to will their good. And I realized that this entire time, my friend Cassidy has been willing my good and pushing me to become Catholic. But I also realized that God had called me there in that moment. And this entire journey wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Mrs. Kernan telling me to go on this trip if it wasn't for me deciding that $100 was not too big of a barrier to go on the March for Life. Obviously everything had to work in total tandem, and it did. But it's even more remarkable to me because when we think about my story and we think about what that means, it's even crazier because so many times I was told that I shouldn't be at the place where I'm at. Whether it be because of the color of my skin, and told that because of the community I grew up in, that I had no place ever going to a college, so I should just find a trade and do that. Or finding out that had it been for even just the slightest change of circumstance, my life could have ended at the hands of an abortionist. But what I really came to understand was that we're called in specific moments because God knows we have a place there, and that we're not only because we have a unique understanding of it, but because we can actually make a difference. And as Mrs. Kernan used to tell me, the theologian Frederick Buechner tells us that the place God calls you is where your greatest passion and the world's greatest need meet. And what that's come to mean to me is two different things. First, obviously, especially at a Catholic school, it would be remiss of me to not discuss the topic of vocation. And I start to understand this idea, right? Because as I'm RJ and I'm getting told to start looking for what my vocation may be, I'm like, what the heck does that mean? And if you were to look up the Latin root, it comes from the word vocare, or as my Latin teacher at Regis University would tell me, vocare, means to call. So essentially God is calling us somewhere, right? And constantly we talk about vocations in terms of religious life or married life and pursuing your vocation. But I think it goes deeper in that God calls us at specific places and specific moments because he knows that we're going to actually impact that moment. And he knows that we have been, created for that moment. And what I start to realize is that when it comes to the issue of abortion, I've been called to help end this. Because as I think of the millions of lives, especially with children that came from circumstances like mine, it's hard to fathom this great atrocity that we've allowed to happen. But I also realize that, of course, with the Lord's help, we have a unique mission and a unique call to not only end Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton, or to end the laws that predate them. So a little fun fact, the state of Colorado, my home state, is actually the first state to pass any law regarding abortion. And in 1967, a Republican lawmaker proposes a bill suggesting that, abortion be allowed up till 20 weeks for whatever circumstance. And he thinks that it's actually the end of his political career. But instead, it passes through the House and passes through the Senate, and the Republican governor at the time signs it, making Colorado, the first notorious state to actually legalize abortion. But it goes deeper than these laws, right? Because if we were to end Roe v. Wade tomorrow, there are still women that need help, and there's still children that need help. But, especially as Catholics, we're called somewhere deeper, and we're called to truly impact the lives of those around us. As the Jesuits would tell us, we're called to the margins and to the marginalized. And at least in our society, one of the most marginalized communities that we have is women in unplanned pregnancies, especially women like my mother. And as I think of our story, my family's story, I am in such gratitude for everything because they really led me here. Because for one, it obviously took my mother making this courageous decision to choose life, which she does. As we know, too many men in our society kind of don't help out women. And in fact, it becomes even more painfully obvious when over 50% of women say that they have felt forced or coerced into an abortion, most often by their male partner. It's even more amazing that my father decides to also give it a go and work his hardest. And in fact, throughout most of my childhood, my father worked 2 jobs just to make sure that I could be in a position to impact society. And what he would tell me is that his main goal was just making sure that I got to live a life that was not only better than his, but that I would have a bigger impact than his. And what I come to realize is that the way to have the most impact on our society and the way to take my unique call is through this issue of abortion. So, as we kind of have touched on briefly, I joined the Stevens Fellowship, and it just sets me on a course. In fact, what's crazy is before I actually go through all of the other fellowships that I do, I actually told my then regional coordinator, Bethany Jansen, that I had no dreams of ever doing pro-life work whatsoever. In fact, I want to go to law school and go make the big bucks. I'd soon come to find out that I actually hate the law and would never be a lawyer, even for all of the big bucks. But I also come to realize, this vocation, right? And I go through the Wilberforce Fellowship, and the next thing you know, I'm begging Reagan Barklage, who is now currently my supervisor, for a job on the daily, and I sent her as many homemade memes as I could to try to convince her that I was the perfect person for the job. And she kept telling me to wait until I graduated. And then I finally find myself here. And it's such a wonderful opportunity because as I come to understand, it's amazing, right? Because when we think of my start, I was unplanned. And there was no warning. No one was like, okay, let's plan this out, let's have a son, build a family. It just happened. And yet here I am, and after all of my family's hard work, and after all of our struggles, I mean, there was times that our food stamps were running out, so I would go with less to eat that night. There was times that I sat there and cried and wondered, why don't I have a nuclear family like everyone else? Like, why don't my dad and mom live together? But I realized that all of this was leading to a specific moment, right? Specific calling. And God was beckoning to me this whole time to help impact our culture because it's my story. And it's what the ancient Greeks would call our verbum, which means word, but in a theological context, it's what our deepest, innermost being is. And I don't mean that like the deep, dark secrets, like the fact that I have every Taylor Swift album up until Reputation, or that I decided to wear cowboy boots today because it gave me about another inch or 2 on my height. But rather, it's what actually makes us who we are. It's what God has instilled in us to kind of hardwire us to be the people that we are. And I realized that, as my father told me that I am a storyteller. And I love getting the opportunity to tell stories. But my story is incomplete if I don't talk about abortion. And I don't talk about the great tragedy that it is. And if I don't tell people that there's mothers just like my own that need them. So for the second part of our talk, I've decided to take on the role of a college professor. And I'm giving you all a PowerPoint, which I know sounds crazy because I don't know if any of you signed up to come hear the guy you've never met talk about a story and then give you, another lecture in the day. But I felt that it was only necessary. All right. So, first off, being at a school like Benedictine, it's amazing, right? I mean, as I've heard on multiple occasions, Benedictine is Catholic Disneyland, and it's the best Catholic school in the country. Now, I am going to unpopularly say that I think that University of Dallas is the best Catholic school in the country, but you guys can all flog me later. But even at Catholic schools like Benedictine, do we run into a problem? And more specifically, we run into a situation that we don't know how to deal with. And the problem is not the situation itself. The problem is that we aren't equipped and prepared to deal with it. So, Students for Life notices that on college campuses, high school campuses, that one of the reasons that abortion thrives so much is because the women, typically a lot of the women that are seeking abortion are in their 20s to 30s, single women that find themselves in unplanned pregnancies. And a lot of these women are on college campuses. And even on Catholic campuses do these happen. So we create the Pregnant on Campus initiative. And essentially, the idea of the Pregnant on Campus initiative is that we can change our campus culture to be more pro-life and specifically be one that affirms women. Because to be pro-life, you have to not only be for the child, but you have to be for the woman as well, which is why we love saying that we're pro-woman and pro-child. And then also, there's this discussion in society that we hear all the time, one that I think kind of offends me because I like to consider myself a feminist, at least in the sense of the original feminists like Alice Paul, who's one of my personal heroes. But women can go to school and have a child, especially if they find themselves in that situation. And I think that there's a problem in saying that women have to choose between a career and a child or a career and a family, because as we all know, that's not true. But also because there's certain rights that pregnant women on campuses have that often aren't protected, especially notoriously at Christian and Catholic colleges, because although they are private schools and kind of get to set their own policies, essentially there are certain policies that take over when you take money from the federal government, like you can't remove scholarships from a pregnant woman if she were to become pregnant, and you can't remove her from housing. If I can get this clicker to work. Unless this is a laser pointer. That might be a laser pointer. Okay, so first, let's talk about unplanned pregnancies and what you can do. And as you can tell, this is my wonderful father and I, as I'm holding my toy Harley Davidson. But there's a lot of steps that we don't take sometimes in cases of unplanned pregnancy. And I thought that as we're discussing my own story in unplanned pregnancies, it seemed fit to talk about. So first, if you ever encounter a woman with an unplanned pregnancy, you should probably, and I shouldn't even say probably, you should be showing empathy to her. Because too often is a woman in an unplanned pregnancy told something like, oh my goodness, like, what are you gonna do? Or I'm so sorry. And like, as Catholics and as pro-lifers, we should be celebrating, right? Because having a child is a wonderful experience. And so in order to show empathy, we should first kind of work on our language. And this is by no means a direct attack at any of you, because I don't know what any of you have done in unplanned pregnancies. But we should be, celebrating with the woman and saying things like, oh my goodness, that's so exciting, like, congratulations, when's your due date? Just talking about how wonderful of a gift this is. Because it is, and it is a wonderful gift, and it's a wonderful gift that, because people like my family affirmed my mother in this circumstance, I got the opportunity to come here and tell you about today. Next, listen. Now, again, this is a hard step, especially if you're like me and like talking as much as me, but there's a time when you need to just sit down and listen to somebody when they're telling you what's going on. And when I say listen, I don't mean just sitting there and letting, the vibrations happen in your eardrums so that the sound goes in and that you're not receiving it. I mean, like, actually truly listen to them and listen to what their needs are. Because too often, women find that they don't think they have a lot of support. And one study even suggests that, again, over 50% of women that choose abortion feel like they just had no one to go to. So if you're ever in this circumstance, you can be that person that they can go to because you took that time to listen to them. Next, don't make assumptions. So this is especially big on a Catholic campus because, as we all know, the Catholic Church teaches that you shouldn't have sex out of wedlock, a teaching that I 100% affirm and think that is vastly important. And I think that theology of the body is not as widely respected as it should be. But in circumstances when a woman finds herself in them, it's still important for us to affirm that great gift that God has given her. So to kind of illustrate this point, I wanted to talk about a friend of mine who is potentially the most Catholic person I know. And she, in college, her senior year, and she's double majoring in accounting and theology, which is like the most insane combo I've ever heard of. But she's in the honors program. By all means, she's doing just wonderful. And then she finds herself in an unplanned pregnancy. And she told me that in this situation, that her pro-life beliefs and her Catholic beliefs are challenged like never before. And she's wondering, like, should I even go through this? Like, I made this huge mistake that led me up to here. So, maybe this isn't meant to be, but had it not been for people like her family and other people just affirming her and kind of not making assumptions, but rather focusing on the well-being of her and her child, she makes the decision to choose life, which is amazing. And she's also she married the man that her first child was born to, and she's now on I think baby number 4. And they all have the most wonderful Catholic names after some of the best Catholic saints. So it's also a little plus. And I've gotten to watch a couple of them at a park every now and then, which is also just a joy of my life. Next, be a friend, because all of you seem to be friendly people. And I would hope that's the case. But be a friend to those women in those unplanned pregnancies, because so many times, again, they don't feel like there's anyone to go to. And a woman feels lost and alone and isolated. So if you can be that, even if you're the one person that is there for them, they're way more likely to choose life. And in fact, the majority of the time, almost 100% of the time, they do because of that. And again, with this concept of agapic love and willing the good of someone else, it's important to kind of be a friend to someone and be a good, godly friend and kind of lead them towards choosing life. And lastly, take time for yourself, because it's difficult talking about unplanned pregnancy. As you've seen, I've probably almost broke down crying 4 times tonight, just talking about my own story. So it can be difficult when you're talking to somebody about this, and especially because it's stressful for them. When other people are stressed out, it's going to tend to stress you out. Psychologically, we just know that that's true. So it's important to take time for yourself and take time to kind of reflect on everything that's going on, but also take time to understand where you're being called in this instance and how you can be that beacon of love for this woman. Next, so 71% of undergraduate parenting students are women. Just kind of a fun fact. But also 4.8 million undergraduates, college students, are raising children. And when we think about those numbers, they're huge, they're vast, right? And when we think about how much this happens, it's bound to happen pretty much everywhere. There are women here at Benedictine that are pregnant, or might be pregnant, but there are definitely women here that are parenting students. And that every campus across the nation, there's most likely at least one person on that campus that either has a child, is pregnant with a child. So we have to kind of consider how we can impact our campus communities for these women. And even for those fathers as well, right? So luckily, there's a lot of resources, and you all specifically are the ones that can share these resources with women, and you're the ones that can kind of be that go-to. So like here at Benedictine, you have one of the most marvelous things I've ever seen at a college campus, or any campus for that matter, and most often when you go to a college campus, you have to refer a woman to a pregnancy center, and you have to, send them to this healthcare facility, and often they're great. Like for me in Denver, Alternatives with Marcy McGovern and Marisol Health with Sarah, I mean, they were two of the most lovely women I've ever met, and I loved getting to send women there if they needed help. But here at Benedictine, your Pregnancy Resource Center is here on this college campus, and you have a lot of supplies for women, like diapers and baby formula, and all of those wonderful things right here. So a woman, if she were to find herself in an unplanned pregnancy, doesn't have to go anywhere except to your Ravens Respect Life Club to find those resources. And I don't know if any of you have ever bought diapers. They're really expensive, really, really expensive. Like the big cases at Sam's Club are like $50. Those last a week. It gets hard, especially when you find yourself in a situation like my family's where the money's not coming in as frequently as you would like. So it's nice to have those resources. And like I said, here we have the wonderful ability to kind of do that all without stepping out of Atchison. Next, how can you support those women on your campus and all those wonderful pro-life organizations that are around, whether it be here in Atchison or when you go back home? So like in Omaha, we have Essential Pregnancy Services and a lot of others that are really amazing. Catholic parishes are amazing. I mean, the Respect Life Apostolates and Knights of Columbus groups are just doing amazing things for our culture and for our community. So how can we kind of direct women to that? And the answer is, obviously, know what's going on and know where you can send women. And also just know how to have these discussions and know what to do. So we'll kind of get more into a lot of that shortly. But some ideas, so some wonderful projects that women or students have done is individual student assistance. So like at my alma mater, Regis Jesuit, there's actually a cool little provision where the school reaffirms the Catholic Church teaching against premarital sex, but it does mention that if a woman were to ever find herself pregnant, the school will do everything in its capacity to help that woman feel supported. So a couple years after I graduated, a young woman found herself pregnant and unaware of what to do, and the school not only got her connected with Marisol Health and with the Archdiocese to find a lot of resources, but they held a private baby shower for her just to kind of celebrate this new gift that she had been given. Letters of support, so if you ever know someone in this situation, or just writing them in general and having them ready, because everyone likes to feel supported, especially if your love language is words of affirmation. Sometimes it's nice to just get a loving note from someone saying that they care. Baby showers, like we just said, is great. Scholarships, so a lot of schools have done amazing things. So University of Nebraska-Lincoln actually has an endowed scholarship for women, or for not just women, but for people that are pregnant and parenting students so that they can continue their education and continue to raise their child. The group at the University of Texas, Austin raised a scholarship of over $50,000 for women in these situations, and hopefully soon that will also be endowed. Community donation drives. So I know Benedictine has done these in the past. Students for Life, we like to do this every year around Christmas. But just raising the community up to kind of support those pregnancy centers and get them the resources that they need so that they can continue their life-affirming work. Fundraising for your local PRC. So that might look a little weird at BC because you'd pretty much just be raising money for Ravens Respect Life, which is totally great. But if when you go back home, if you want to help do fundraising for whoever it may be, your local pregnancy center, they always can use funding. Sometimes that funding will give wonderful things like an ultrasound machine, or the availability to hire another nurse, or just to stock up those resources that they have, and really makes a difference. And then finally, volunteering. And I know there's a lot of guys in the room right now. Yes, you can volunteer at a pregnancy resource center too. So what's nice is you can do so much. You can just volunteer to help clean. Granted, in COVID, I don't know what that looks like. But you can volunteer to help clean. You can volunteer to, again, like we said, help them fundraise. Or sometimes pregnancy resource centers will want someone to help them check in at the desk, or even kind of be, someone to have discussions with. So like at Alternatives for young men, there's a program where essentially if a man were to volunteer and wants to do this program, they'll connect him with some of these fathers and these unplanned pregnancies, just to be, another man to kind of, build brotherhood with, but also to kind of guide them and lead them in this new situation that they found, and just help raise them up so that they can be strong enough to raise their children. Next, so there's a lot of advocacy projects. So adding resources to your school. This is really important. Also, I just realized this slide is really messed up. That's supposed to say website, and it does, but obviously with a huge typo, as you see. But often we don't realize all of the resources that schools offer. So like at both of my institutions, the Community College of Aurora and Regis University, they have lactation rooms for women that are pregnant and parenting, and Regis went far enough to also have study rooms specifically dedicated for pregnant and parenting students. And then the Community College of Aurora actually had a cool program called the Strengthening Working Families Initiative, which essentially would connect these people with local funding sources so that they could find food stamps if they needed, they could find jobs if they needed low-cost housing. And it did a lot of good work, but often people don't know about it. And like at Regis, I had to do a little digging, and it wasn't anywhere on the website. So it's helpful to make sure that those go up. And if you know your school's IT person and there's not anything up there, maybe convince them to put it up. Advertising policies and legal rights like Title IX. So like we talked about, a woman can't lose her scholarship if she were to become pregnant. If the school receives federal funding. A woman couldn't lose her sports scholarship. And there's actually legal precedents for that as well, with a track runner at, I think, the University of Texas. Networking with administration and staff. So talking with your dean, talking with professors, talking with different people on campus, like your health center, to get these resources out, because obviously we want to make sure that these resources are not only widely available, but they're widely known about. Policy on resource proposals. So if you're noticing that Benedictine's policies aren't as helpful for women as we'd like, work to change that. So for instance, at Liberty University, another Christian school, although they're not Catholic, they had a policy where essentially a woman was to be removed from the dorm if she were to find herself pregnant because of the sin of premarital sex and having a child out of wedlock. And one student who was one of our Christian leadership fellows actually made it his personal mission to ensure that this policy was changed, and it recently was because of the work that he put in. So you can do that too. And then RAs, or your RDs, so like Nathan here, your wonderful resident director, make sure that they know these resources, and make sure that all of your RAs know these resources, because they might be the first person that a woman would go to, and you want them to be as prepared as possible. So next, how can we impact our community? So these are actually questions for you all. What's a way that you think you can get this? Specifically, let's just think about BC in this kind of model, but what do you think we can do to get BC working together on the Pregnant on Campus initiative?
I think for one thing, just advertising more about our resources. I don't think, to my knowledge, it doesn't seem like they get
Great. Are all of you, just quick straw poll, are all of you aware of everything that BC offers for women if they were to become pregnant? No? Seems pretty standard across the board. I got one nod. You're Ravens Respect Life president, everyone. So, work with Ravens Respect Life. That's a good way to learn about what you can do here on this campus and figure out more. Or talk to your Dean of Students or your health center, because they also will have lots of information most of the time. Next, any ideas for big projects that you could get to get like local organizations on campus? This one's a little harder because I know there's not a whole lot in Atchison, but we can think a little bigger here if we need to. Any ideas?
We have Knights of Columbus, and I know that they do a lot. They do something with them.
Awesome. Exactly, right? Knights of Columbus, one of our wonderful pro-life organizations in the country. I mean, Knights of Columbus pretty much fully funded one of my March for Life trips. And okay, little known fact, most Knights of Columbus councils have a lot of money that they don't know what to do with because no one ever asks them for it. So if you want to find a way to, fund some of the resources for women, Knights of Columbus, because they seriously have so much money and no one is asking them for it. So be the first one to ask. It's important. And then lastly, what kind of efforts do you think will create this so that everyone in BC knows about it? I know this one's a little harder because I know we deal with the BC bubble here. Yes?
Yeah, actually, I'm just curious, I haven't checked, but if we don't have information about our resources on the website, we could maybe include it like under student health, maybe even suggest to student health that they have a poster with some of our resources for pregnancies.
Definitely. Yes, exactly. Something else you can do, and the website has changed, so I can't totally promise you everything on it, but we have actually a new website called Standing With You that can get women connected to all these resources. And I think it's supposed to have your campus's resources as well. But yes, exactly, getting your campus health center to share these resources in some capacity or to have them on their website, getting them put in the student handbook, just making sure that they are out there in case a situation ever pops up, because you want people to be prepared, because it's going to happen. And we want to make sure that we're saving as many lives as possible while also loving the women in these situations. So this is a challenge. I know it says as a group because this is a training we normally would give to a student group. But as kind of a group that's here, I guess, think of 3 goals specifically for how we can change Benedictine to help it better support pregnant parenting students. I'll give you all 5 minutes. You don't have to get all together because social distancing, so we should probably maintain that somehow. But if you just want to throw ideas out there, I'll just kind of let you all go for about 3 to 5 minutes. I also have an expo marker if you all want me to take notes, so let me know. Okay, it was a little shorter than 3 to 5 minutes, but I'm kind of hearing a quiet down, which is good because I think that means we're making progress. So, any ideas for our 3 goals? Just raise your hand or shout them out. Yes? Okay, so list of volunteers, let's say. Sorry if my handwriting's bad. My grandma told me I should be a doctor, and I guess I just took that to heart, but I'm not smart enough to be a doctor, so here we are. Awesome. I saw another hand.
This isn't like super concrete, but I think like me like coming here, like I didn't know these things. So
Mhm.
like, if it comes up in conversation, just being like, hey, did you guys know there's like a legitimate like actual right that these people have? And I think especially Bennington, there's kind of a stigma like we're like, oh yeah, if someone got pregnant, we would love them, but like actually we don't like internally judging them. And they maybe could like legally stay here if they wouldn't want to, and there've been cases where women like stopped, you know, even attending here because of the way they were treated. So it's like a way to promote like, you know, like an actual opportunity to like let them in that situation.
Okay, so I took 2 different things from what you brought up. So 1, raise awareness, which is super important, yes. 2, remove stigma, and I'm actually glad you brought that. So I know I'm at a Catholic school right now. Does anyone know what the etymology of stigma is? Right, exactly. So pretty much stigma back in its Latin and Greek root was like a physical mark. I think it's in Old English where we get this idea of like a bad mark against someone. And I think one thing you said was extremely important, especially at a Catholic school. As much as pro-life as we are, I mean, Benedictine does a lot. And you all have like personalized March for Life signs. Most schools don't have personalized March for Life signs. You also take buses upon buses of people to the March for Life, which is great. But one way that we can be better is by removing stigma about pregnant parenting students, right? Because in order to love them, we have to just love them, right? What does Christ do in the Bible? He goes out and he hangs out with the sinners. Now, I'm not saying go out and get yourself in trouble, but find yourself people that you can make a huge impact on and kind of love them and help change their life, because I guarantee you'll have that opportunity if you just look for it. So we got 3 things, but is there anything else anyone's like burning to share? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and proceed with the end of our mini lecture. But I did want to just kind of wrap up with a little bit about Students for Life and kind of what we do. So as Gabby just kind of mentioned when she was introducing me, my name is Jalen, and I'm the Midwest Regional Coordinator. Specifically, I have over 50 groups in Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota that I work with on a daily basis. This is my full-time mission, to help students, grow in their pro-life beliefs, but mobilizing them to act on those beliefs and, kind of put their faith and their love in action. And it's because people decided to kind of not look at my mother and the stigma that came with being an unplanned pregnancy, but they really loved on her and gave her the opportunity, empowered her to choose life. And without that opportunity, right, I wouldn't get to pursue this mission, and I wouldn't get to be with all of you today. So, yeah. And with questions, they can be either about the training, or if you have any questions about my life, you can feel free to shoot, and I won't be upset if there's no questions at all. Any questions? Yes.
So I was curious, because you said they can be removed from the dorm, but what are the laws once the child is born? Like, are they allowed to continue to live there?
Right. So that one's a little more difficult. A lot of times, yes, schools will allow them to still live in the dorms. A lot of schools will provide them some form of alternate housing. And that's one thing that we could do here at BC potentially as well. luckily, at a Catholic school, although this does happen, I don't think it's as widespread as it might happen at a school like KU, right? But sometimes it even helps like a project like, hey, maybe we should have some kind of housing designated for women in these situations if it were to occur. But yes, so it kind of always varies. It depends on school policy, but a lot of times either the woman will continue to keep her dorm or that she already lives in, or she's provided something alternate. Great question. Any other questions? Great. Well, I do have a couple more slides, but nothing too crazy. Just a real cool resource that I wanted to share with you all before we depart today, studentsforlifehq.com. So all of this wonderful stuff that I get to do as a regional coordinator, like training you all on how to deal with different things and with being pro-life, with like how to impact public policy, how to be more supportive towards women in unplanned pregnancy. We have put all of this on a cool website for all of you for free. You just have to sign up and basically like give us your email account. And I think, don't quote me on this, but Apple on most sites also lets you like give a fake email and they'll just forward it to you. So if you don't want to give us your email, you can do that. But there's a lot of strategies and resources and trainings for you all to do. And if you do some of those, we'll give you free stuff. And at least when I was in college, if it was free, it was for me. So if you're looking for free stuff, definitely check that out. There is my contact information. If anyone is ever like, I really want to talk to this guy afterwards. If not, I totally won't be offended. But you can reach me at jderuso@studentsforlife.org. Jeruso is really hard to spell, which is why I put it on the screen for you all. Fun fact, it took me until 3rd grade to actually learn how to spell my name properly. And in fact, when I did think I learned how to spell my name and told my dad how to spell it, he told me I was wrong. So that was an awkward experience. And then lastly, none of this can be done without wonderful supporters. So if you ever feel called to help support my mission, you can find that at studentsforlife.org/Midwest. And then if you are looking for updates from Students for Life, you can text LIFE to 612-688-5433. So if any of you want to continue to receive wonderful information or just to learn more, sign up for text updates. It doesn't say it on the screen, but standard data rates do apply. So if you're one of the weird people that doesn't have a data plan, even though they're like pretty standard now, you might incur a couple extra charges, just a heads up. And then lastly, you can find us at Students for Life on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I think we even have TikTok now. I don't know because I'm a little too old and don't understand TikTok. But we share amazing, graphics and even quotes from, Yeezy himself. So if you want to be able to access those all, make sure to follow us on social media. And with that, just thank you so much for allowing me to share my story with you all today.